This is the Collecting Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purse, here with your co-host, Bill Hamel.
I'm somewhat more comfortable collecting real estate than I am collecting other stuff.
All right, collecting real estate is property number 8.
Property number 8, 864 Washington Avenue, which became a very familiar street in this section of Pine Hills for us.
That's the same street as last time, correct?
Yeah, right next door.
So how did you find the next door property for sale, or was it off market?
While we were rehabbing 862 Washington Avenue, we got to know the next door neighbor, one of the tenants that lived in 864. And nice guy geez, I ended up developing a relationship with him for 20 years. He had just since passed, unfortunately. But he was able to give us a little bit of intel stating that his landlord was struggling in their building, the second floor apartment. They always had issues with tenants and continued turning that over, having difficulty, which equated to not being able to pay their mortgage in a timely manner. And it was pretty clear that they were turning into don't wanters, meaning they had enough of this property.
So how long after you purchased the property next door did you find that out?
It was a matter of a month or two, where we started to communicate with that tenant, and he was basically discussing his landlord's issues as far as, they were vocal to him, as far as the problems they were having with the second floor apartment over and over again, and which made it difficult for them to pay their bills.
And once you found that out, what did you do with that information?
Just kind of tucked it under our hat as we were finishing up the rehab at 862 Washington and getting that property situated. Things evolved little by little to the point where I believe I actually met the owner of 864 Washington briefly, and I believe towards the tail end of their ownership, they showed me their cards, basically saying they were gonna lose the property. Trying to remember back now, and I offered them like $50,000 for the property, which would have allowed them to get out and maybe have a few dollars, in their pocket from their ownership of the property. And I know we didn't make a deal. Somehow, some way, we couldn't put something together, and eventually it went up for auction.
Okay. I was expecting this to be your first off-market purchase. In the last episode, the last couple, you mentioned having a good loan officer at Homestead Funding. Sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent here going off topic, but you also mentioned having a good broker who helped you find these properties. How important was it when you were getting started to put together that AllStar team to make things run smoothly?
The AllStar team to make things run smoothly didn't happen. I guess you can say you start putting together the team, just by having an attorney closing deals for us, insurance people getting insurance, the bare necessities that you have to have on, any properties. So the team changed over time as we accumulated more properties and got more and more familiar with the space. We had made some changes with all of those professionals that fit what we were doing better. People that were more in tune of what the investment property game was all about, starting with, your real estate attorney to, your insurance agent, and everything else that you have to put together Those are the only two that I can think of at this point in time, because we were still just doing everything on our own. I would really have to fast forward quite a bit, probably to property number, probably into the 20s, before we really put together a team, meaning employees and other professionals that were able to help us out throughout the process.
Okay, so going back to Washington Ave, did you see this for auction in the paper? Is that where you found out that it was going up for sale?
Yeah, it was clear that this was happening, and I was hawking the legal notices. So at this point in time, I had developed some knowledge through reading materials, different things that I had purchased, to develop that education on how to find distressed properties, auction properties, county courthouse sales. So I was looking in the legal notices of the local newspaper every day, specifically for this property, but at the same time, just going right through the legal notices, which basically advertise, whatever bank as the plaintiff versus, the homeowner who would be the defendant that hadn't been paying their mortgage note, and the property was being advertised to be sold at the county courthouse.
Okay, so you're checking the paper every day, and then you finally see it in there. Once you saw it, what did you do next?
Well, you schedule it in. It's great when you see that legal notice that you've been waiting for, and you open the paper that one day and there it is, because you've been looking for it. You're like, okay, because things take time. So, this one evolved, saw that legal notice, and it probably didn't happen for 30 days or so. So I was able to plan accordingly, making sure I was prepared for that auction. Fortunately, knowing that first floor tenant at 864 Washington, we became friendly, and I was able to see the inside of the house, really get the inside scoop, which you normally don't get on these types of opportunities. So I had a pretty good amount of insight, what this property was all about physically going into that auction.
Can you walk me through the auction process for anyone that's never been through one before?
Auction process in this case, when it's a mortgage foreclosure, it is a referee that is basically an attorney that's hired by the bank to facilitate the auction. So they'll advertise it in the newspaper and maybe some other publications. I think by law they're required to advertise it once a week in publications of their choice. The newspaper just ended up being the common area that this was done. And you show up at that auction, and he or she reads those terms of sale, which are pretty standard, basically saying that you are buying a property as is. And you have to put down 10% non-refundable deposit. At that point, you have 30 days to close on the property.
And there wasn't much competition.
There was nobody there. Once again, I'm reflecting, and there might have been one or two other people, but no one else bid. I was the only bidder on this.
Wow. And that was your first auction, right?
Yeah, this was the first auction. So originally I was going to purchase this property, like I said, for $50,000 from this seller. That was worth it to me because it fit my location criteria. We had just purchased the property next door, and renting both units out, knowing what work had to be done to get the property up to speed, $50,000 was fair. And I was able to see, sometimes they have the advertised judgment amount, meaning the bank puts a number in that auction advertisement, basically what they're owed on the property. In this case, it was like 37,000 and some change.
And so that's what you ended up getting it for?
Yeah, I ended up getting it for, I think it was 37 and a few $100s. So what happens is the auction starts, the referee reads the terms of sale. And in this case, and in many cases, the bank doesn't even send a representative to the auction, but tells the referee to start the bidding at that initial amount, which is basically saying the bank has made the first bid. So the bank makes that first bid at the judgment amount, and then the auction starts. If nobody bids on it, the bank has basically just legally purchased that through that next step of the foreclosure property for that judgment amount. Sometimes, you may have a bidder who will make that next bid, and there could be no one else there at the auction, but the referee or the representative by the bank may be directed to make another bid. And they'll have a game plan where they'll go up to a certain amount and they'll stop, just like any other bidder would. In this case, they just made that first bid of that judgment amount, and that was all they were going to do. And I was there making that next bid. No one else was bidding, so I was the successful bidder.
Okay, that was a really good walkthrough. How bad was it inside when you finally got the property and you're taking a look at what you need to do in there?
Well, I had the inside scoop from that first floor tenant. So I had been in his apartment several times. His apartment was in, good shape. He lived there. He kept it very nice, and he was paying rent. So, no issues on the first floor. Second floor, just some cosmetics, nothing major. I believe we had to replace some kitchen cabinets and do some minor cosmetics. But this building, was a one bedroom on the first floor and a 2-bedroom on the second floor, not a whole lot of square footage. So, we probably only had to put $7,000 or $8,000 into the property to get it fully occupied, fully operating, and into the portfolio.
Okay, so this wasn't a construction rehab again. How did you finance that 7,000-8,000 in the property itself?
This is a fun story, because this is when we really have to get creative. So when we won at the auction, we put the 10% down, and we had 30 days to close. And being not a big purchase price, at that point in time, I had done a lot of reading and exploring on creative financing, and thinking up resources to get deals done. So I had built up a large number of credit cards. So I was keeping them in my wallet for safekeeping until I had the opportunity to use them. So at that point, it's pulling out my, who knows how many, 8 or 10 credit cards, sitting down one day and calling all those customer service numbers on those credit cards and asking or confirming, verifying the terms of cash advances, fees that I was going to be charged for cash advances, the startup interest rates, when the interest rates might go up, because I did know that, these were credit cards, and I better really know exactly what I was getting into from credit card to credit card, because I was basically getting whatever money I could from each credit card that would be able to get me to purchase that property. So it ended up being using 7 or 8 credit cards with cash advances to fund, a $37,000 purchase.
That's a great example of creative financing, and it all worked out for you?
Worked great. The idea was, this is what I learned. It's a pretty simple concept. Yes, buying a property with all credit cards seems risky. Some people would think is kind of crazy, but there was a strategy to it. I knew that we would make this purchase, do the minor fix-up work to get the property repositioned and rented. And, at that point, we're just seeking out conventional financing. So, we applied to the, normal bank that we had been getting loans from. And it was easy to qualify for this type of loan, this type of property with this amount of financing necessary. And we refinanced it, paid off the credit cards, probably put some money in our pocket at the time. So when you're refinancing, we probably refinance that with a purchase appraised value of, I would say $80,000, $90,000. So they gave us 80% loan, and we just had to pay off that 37,000 plus the 5 or 6,000 that we put into the property to get it up to speed. So we probably got a loan for like 60 grand. We were into the property for probably in the 40s, put some money in our account. Fortunately, that conventional financing, the principal, interest, taxes, insurance, all those operating expenses, were still covered by the rents that we were receiving. So, this was my first case of over financing, where we now own this property 7 or 8 months after owning it. We now have $10,000 in our account, more than we had. And this property was supporting itself with the current rents. So we owned it. We were being paid to own this property.
Yeah, a couple of things here. First, your average consumer is trained to think that debt is bad, but in credit card, cash advances, sounds like almost dirty words. Such a good example of how you can use that debt to your advantage and make a profit with it. And second, it sounds like you used a BRRRR method there before BRRRR method was a term.
Yeah. I was just learning things as we went. Naturally, I had been doing a lot of reading and different authors with different specialties. So what I did realize very clearly was there's a difference between credit for business and credit personally. So very simple concept, where I don't use my credit cards to go to the mall and spend a lot of money. I use my credit cards for business. So it's the matter of letting credit take advantage of you in relation to you taking advantage of the credit.
Such an important concept. Any crazy stories once you got going with this property?
The only, this property ran pretty well for years. There was nothing major other than that guy next door, Carlos, who was our first floor tenant for 20 years. He was an interesting dude. He became a great friend of mine. When we were rehabbing 862 Washington Ave, and we were originally meeting Carlos, we would see him get out of taxis, get off of the bus, and Carlos dressed very smoothly. I don't know what there could be a lot of adjectives used, but our first impression of Carlos, another one of those fun times that me and my partner Greg had, as we're looking out the window, as we're doing work, watching him pass our property, go to his apartment, with his fedora, his suit on, the nice shoes, he looked like a pimp.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, in the beginning of our careers, being like, oh my God, 860, we just bought 862 Washington, and we have a pimp living next door at 864. And that was far from the case. It was just Carlos's style. He was a New York City guy that relocated into Albany at some point in his life. And, he just had a certain style. And after we met him for the first time, especially after we got to know him, he was just a great guy that meant well. Always very conscious of taking care of his priorities. And, and I think that's how we clicked, because even though he was our tenant, he saw the value for both parties, taking care of his property, making sure that his bills are paid, and just doing the right thing.
Sounds like quite the character. Is there anything you would do differently about this property, this investment?
Not really. When we first bought it, we did it like we did a lot of stuff. I guess you could say if I was to do anything differently, it would be the same idea on a lot of our properties early on, where we bought them and did the bare minimum to make the apartments fresh and clean for that tenant. So we didn't overspend by any means. We were operating very thinly, based on limited amount of capital. So we ended up putting a lot of money into the exterior probably 4 or 5 years after the fact. Once we were developing more traction with more property and accumulating the portfolio. So we probably did some refinancing with different properties and knew that we had to go back to that one to put on vinyl siding and do the roof and some capital expenditures that were smart long-term improvements.
Okay. And at this point, there's still no exit strategy. You're just collecting real estate.
Yeah, we're collecting real estate at that point. This is just property number 8. So it's now 1999. And we are just building that portfolio, just seeing about accumulating as much as we can. And each property just added to that monthly cash flow. So the general concept of, this is our monthly cash flow with all the properties combined. And this is another property in the portfolio that we're into it for, say, $60,000. It's worth 90. So there's another $30,000 in equity that we can add to all of the equity buildup from the previous properties. And we were building net worth.
And the end goal never changed. It's just continue to build.
Yeah, at that point, we were just looking to accumulate property. We were buying and holding. No exit in mind at that point.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing. Looking forward to the next one.
Sounds great. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Bill.